A whispered plea before a wedding unravels love, secrets, and destiny. Jungkook's answer will change everything forever. Jimin whispered, "Don't marry without me." Jungkook's answer changed everything. "Don't marry without me." The words weren't loud, yet they shattered the silence louder than thunder. Jungkook froze mid-step at the end of the aisle, the polished floor reflecting the trembling of his hands as if even the ground could feel the fracture running through him. The soft murmur of guests dissolved into a distant hum like waves retreating from a storm. He didn't turn immediately. He couldn't, because he knew that voice, knew it in the marrow of his bones, in the part of his heart he had buried so deeply he convinced himself it no longer existed. But it did. It always did. Slowly, almost painfully, Jungkook turned his head. Jimin stood there at the back of the chapel, breath uneven, hair slightly damp as if he had run through the city to get here. The doors behind him swayed faintly, letting in a sliver of cold air that brushed against Jungkook's skin like a warning. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and his eyes, those eyes, held something raw and unguarded, something Jungkook hadn't seen in years. Fear. Not fear of being seen, but fear of being too late. The bride beside Jungkook shifted slightly. Her fingers tightened around the bouquet, the subtle rustle of petals sounding almost accusatory in the silence. Jungkook felt it, her confusion, her hurt, the quiet question hanging in the air that no one dared to voice. "Who is he?" she whispered, her voice fragile like glass about to crack. Jungkook swallowed, but no words came, because how could he explain something he had spent years running from? Jimin took a step forward, then another, as if each movement required him to fight against an invisible force pulling him back. His gaze never left Jungkook's, not even for a second. "I told you," Jimin said, his voice steadier now, though it trembled beneath the surface. "You promised me you wouldn't do this." A flicker of memory surged through Jungkook's mind, rain against a window, a quiet apartment filled with unfinished conversations, Jimin's voice softer then but no less intense. "Don't leave me behind, Jungkook." Jungkook clenched his jaw. That was a long time ago. The lie tasted bitter the moment it left his lips. Jimin let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh, the kind that carried more pain than amusement. "Does time really erase everything for you, or do you just pretend it does?" The tension in the room thickened, pressing down on everyone present. Guests shifted uncomfortably, whispers beginning to ripple like cracks in a dam, but Jungkook heard none of it. All he could hear was the echo of his own heartbeat and the voice he had tried so desperately to forget. "Why are you here?" Jungkook asked, his tone sharper than he intended, as if harshness could shield him from the truth. Jimin stopped a few steps away now, close enough that Jungkook could see the faint scar near his eyebrow, a memory from another time, another life. Close enough to see the exhaustion etched into his features, the sleepless nights, the battles fought alone. "I had to come," Jimin said quietly, "because if I didn't you would have gone through with it." Jungkook's chest tightened. "I am going through with it." "Then look at me and say it again." The challenge hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. Jungkook hesitated. And in that hesitation, everything was revealed. Jimin's lips parted slightly as if he had expected this, yet it still hurt. "You can't even lie properly anymore." The bride took a step back now, her expression shifting from confusion to something more complex, realization, perhaps, or the slow understanding that she had been standing in the middle of a story that didn't belong to her. "Jungkook," she said softly, "tell me what's happening." He turned to her then, and for a moment, guilt surged through him so fiercely it nearly knocked the breath out of his lungs. She didn't deserve this. She didn't deserve to be caught in the ruins of something she never knew existed. His voice faltered. "I thought I had moved on." Jimin closed his eyes briefly, the words striking deeper than any accusation. "So did I." The confession lingered, fragile and devastating. Silence stretched between them, filled with everything unsaid. Years of distance, of missed calls, of messages left unread, years of convincing themselves that what they had was something they could outgrow. But love doesn't disappear just because you ask it to. It waits. It lingers. It comes back when you least expect it, and when it hurts the most. "Why now?" Jungkook asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why come back now?" Jimin opened his eyes, and this time there was no hesitation, no fear of vulnerability. "Because I almost didn't make it." The words landed like a blow. Jungkook's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Jimin looked away for the first time, his gaze dropping to the floor as if the memory itself was too heavy to hold. Last month, there was an accident. He paused, his fingers curling slightly at his sides. For a while, I thought I wouldn't get another chance to say anything. A chill ran through Jungkook. And the only thing I could think about, Jimin continued, his voice trembling now, was you. The world seemed to tilt. I realized something lying there, Jimin said, looking back up. I realized that no matter how far I run, no matter how much I try to rebuild myself, you're still the one I come back to. Jungkook felt it then, the walls he had built, the careful structure of his life beginning to crack. I'm not asking you to choose me, Jimin added quickly, as if sensing the storm inside Jungkook. I needed you to know before it was too late. Before it was too late. The phrase echoed, heavy with meaning. Jungkook glanced at the altar, at the future he had been so certain about just moments ago, a future that suddenly felt distant, almost unreal. Then he looked back at Jimin. At the past he had never truly left behind. At the truth he could no longer ignore. I was going to forget you today, Jungkook said quietly. Jimin's expression faltered, pain flickering across his face, but he nodded as if he had expected nothing less. I know. But I can't. The words came out before Jungkook could stop them. And everything changed. The air shifted, the tension breaking into something raw and undeniable. Jimin's eyes widened slightly, hope and fear colliding in a way that made his breath hitch. The bride closed her eyes for a moment, a single tear slipping down her cheek, not out of anger but understanding. Jungkook took a step forward. Then another. Until he stood right in front of Jimin. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to, because in that silence everything was already said. I don't know what this means, Jungkook admitted, his voice unsteady. I don't know what happens after this. Jimin let out a shaky breath. Neither do I. But I know I can't pretend anymore. The truth hung between them, fragile but unbreakable. Jimin gave a small, bittersweet smile. That's enough for me. Jungkook hesitated for only a second before reaching out, his fingers brushing against Jimin's wrist, tentative, uncertain but real. And for the first time in years, neither of them pulled away. Behind them, the chapel remained silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Not waiting for a decision. But witnessing the moment, everything finally became undeniable. And somehow, despite the chaos, despite the uncertainty, despite the lives about to be unraveled, Jungkook felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. Not about the future, but about the truth he could no longer run from. You're walking away from me for him. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut sharper than anything else in the room. Jungkook's hand was still wrapped around Jimin's wrist when the question landed, and for a moment he couldn't move. The weight of it pressed into his chest, heavy and suffocating, because this was the consequence he had always feared but never truly faced. He turned slowly. She stood there, no longer just the bride waiting at the altar, but a woman confronting the collapse of everything she believed in. Her bouquet had slipped slightly in her grip, petals falling one by one onto the polished floor like silent witnesses. I deserve an answer, she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it, not silence. Jungkook inhaled sharply, his throat tight. It's not. Don't, she interrupted, shaking her head. Don't lie to me now, not after all this. The room seemed smaller, the air thinner, every pair of eyes locked onto them. But Jungkook felt trapped in a space far more intimate and brutal, the space between truth and consequence. Jimin shifted beside him, his wrist still caught in Jungkook's grip, though he didn't try to pull away. If anything, his presence felt grounding, like the only real thing in a world unraveling too fast. I didn't plan this, Jungkook said finally, his voice rough. I thought I had everything under control. A hollow laugh escaped her lips. Control, she gestured faintly toward Jimin, is that what you call this? Jungkook flinched. Jimin lowered his gaze briefly, guilt flickering across his face, but he stepped forward anyway, his voice quieter but firm. This is my fault. No, Jungkook said immediately, sharper than intended. It's not. It is, Jimin insisted, finally pulling his wrist free, though the absence of Jungkook's touch felt louder than the contact itself. I shouldn't have come. Then why did you? She asked, turning her attention to him now, her eyes searching, demanding. Jimin met her gaze, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that transcended rivalry or jealousy. Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. The honesty in his voice was disarming. She studied him for a long second, then looked back at Jungkook. And you, she asked softly, could you live with yourself if you stayed? The question hit harder than anything else. Jungkook opened his mouth, but no answer came. Because the truth, the real truth, was something he had buried under layers of obligation, expectation, and fear. I tried, he admitted, his voice barely audible. I tried to build something stable, something right. And was it? She pressed. He hesitated. That was enough. Her eyes closed briefly, and when she opened them again, something had changed. The hurt was still there, but it had sharpened into clarity. You don't love me the way you should, she said, not as an accusation but as a realization. Jungkook's chest tightened. I care about you, I really do. But you love him. The words hung in the air, undeniable. Jungkook didn't answer. He didn't need to. Jimin looked away, his jaw tightening, as if hearing it out loud made everything more real than he was prepared for. A fragile silence followed, broken only by the faint sound of someone shifting in their seat. Then she laughed softly, not bitter, not cruel, just tired. Do you know what's funny? She said. I think I knew, not everything but enough to feel that there was a part of you I could never reach. Jungkook's gaze dropped. You deserved better than that. Don't say that like it fixes anything, she replied gently. It doesn't. Another pause. Then with a steady breath, she set the bouquet down on a nearby bench. I won't be the person you settle for, she said, her voice gaining strength, not when your heart is somewhere else. Jungkook felt something twist painfully inside him. I never wanted to hurt you. I know, she said, but you did. The simplicity of it made it worse. Jimin took a small step back now, as if giving them space, but his presence still lingered like a quiet storm waiting to break. What happens now? Jungkook asked, the question sounding almost lost. She looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head slightly. That's something you need to figure out, not with me. And just like that, she turned. Each step she took away from the altar echoed through the chapel, final and irreversible. No one tried to stop her, no one spoke. The weight of the moment was too heavy for interruption. The doors opened, then closed, and she was gone. Silence swallowed everything. Jungkook stood there unmoving as the reality of what had just happened settled over him like a storm finally breaking. His chest rose and fell unevenly, his thoughts scattered, his carefully constructed life collapsing in the span of minutes. You didn't have to do that. Jimin's voice was softer now, laced with something that sounded dangerously close to regret. Jungkook let out a shaky breath. Yes, I did. Jimin shook his head. You could have chosen differently. But it would have been a lie. The words came without hesitation. Jimin stared at him, something conflicted flashing across his face. And what about now? What is this? He asked, gesturing faintly between them. Because I didn't come here expecting you two to blow everything up. Jungkook let out a humorless laugh. Neither did I. Then why did you? Jungkook stepped closer, his voice dropping. Because when you walked in, everything I tried to convince myself of just fell apart. Jimin's breath hitched slightly, but he didn't step back this time. That's not a reason, Jimin said, though his voice lacked conviction. It is for me. The tension between them shifted, no longer hidden beneath years of distance. It was raw now, exposed, impossible to ignore. You think this is enough? Jimin asked suddenly, his tone sharpening. You think choosing me in a moment like this fixes everything we've been through? Jungkook's expression hardened slightly. I'm not saying it does. Then what are you saying? Jimin pressed, frustration bleeding through. Because I didn't come back to be your second chance. I didn't come back to be the thing you run to when everything else falls apart. You're not that, Jungkook snapped, the words coming faster now. You were never that. Then why did you leave? The question hit like a punch. Jungkook froze. Jimin's eyes burned with something deeper than anger, something wounded, something unresolved. You don't get to stand here and act like this is some grand realization when you were the one who walked away first. Jungkook clenched his fists. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice. Not when it meant losing everything else. The words echoed, louder than intended. A beat of silence followed. Then Jimin laughed quietly, shaking his head. So you chose everything else over me. Jungkook's chest tightened painfully. I thought it was the right thing to do. For who? Jungkook didn't answer. Because he didn't know. Or maybe he did, and the answer wasn't one he wanted to face. Jimin exhaled slowly, the anger draining from his expression, leaving behind something more vulnerable. Do you even know what you want now? Jungkook looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time since all of this began, his voice was completely honest. I want the truth, he said, even if it ruins me. Jimin's gaze softened slightly, though uncertainty still lingered. And what if the truth isn't enough? Jungkook took another step closer, close enough that the space between them felt charged, fragile. Then at least it'll be real. Jimin's breath caught. For a moment, neither of them moved, the tension stretching, building, threatening to break into something neither of them fully understood yet. Outside, faint thunder rumbled in the distance, the sky darkening as if mirroring the storm unfolding between them. And inside the quiet, abandoned chapel, two people stood at the center of everything they had tried to escape. With nothing left to hide. And everything left to lose. The first crack of thunder split the silence just as Jimin stepped back. Don't come any closer. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a sharp edge that stopped Jungkook mid-step. The air between them shifted again, no longer just charged with unresolved feelings, but something heavier, fear, hesitation, the kind that comes from knowing exactly how much damage one person can do to you. Jungkook frowned slightly, his chest still rising unevenly. You're the one who came here. I know, Jimin replied quickly, almost too quickly as if the words had been waiting on his tongue. And maybe that was a mistake. The words lingered, colder than the storm gathering outside. Jungkook's jaw tightened. You don't mean that. Jimin let out a quiet, humorless laugh, running a hand through his hair. Don't I? He glanced around the emptying chapel, the scattered petals on the floor, the abandoned altar, the echo of a wedding that never happened. Look at this, Jungkook, look at what just happened. I am looking at it, Jungkook shot back, his voice rising. I'm standing in it. Exactly, Jimin said, his tone hardening. And you think this is the beginning of something, this chaos, this destruction, you think it's romantic. Jungkook's eyes flashed. I never said that. But you're acting like it, Jimin pressed, stepping closer again despite his earlier warning, his frustration breaking through. Like choosing me in front of everyone suddenly fixes years of silence, years of you pretending I didn't exist. Jungkook's breath hitched. I never pretended that. You disappeared, Jimin snapped. That's worse. The accusation hung heavy, undeniable. Jungkook ran a hand over his face, the tension clawing at him from the inside. You think it was easy for me, he said, his voice cracking slightly. You think I just walked away and forgot about you? Jimin's expression flickered, but he didn't soften. You didn't have to forget, you just had to stay. I couldn't. Why? Jimin demanded, stepping closer until there was barely any space left between them. Give me one real reason, not excuses, not something vague, the truth. Jungkook hesitated. And in that hesitation, Jimin's eyes darkened. That's what I thought, Jimin murmured, turning away slightly as if the answer he didn't get was answer enough. Because I was scared. The words burst out of Jungkook before he could stop them, raw and unfiltered. Jimin froze. Jungkook's chest heaved, his fists clenched at his sides. I was scared of what it meant, he continued, his voice unsteady but relentless now. Scared of how much you mattered, scared that if I chose you I'd lose everything else, my career, my family, the life I was supposed to have. Jimin slowly turned back to face him, his expression unreadable. And so you chose safety instead, Jimin said quietly. I thought it would hurt less, Jungkook admitted. Jimin let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but there was no humor in it, did it? Jungkook shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. No. Silence settled again, but it was different this time, less explosive, more fragile, like something on the verge of breaking in a quieter, more devastating way. You don't get to come back into my life like this, Jimin said after a moment, his voice softer but no less firm. You don't get to decide all of a sudden that I'm the truth you can't run from. I'm not deciding it, Jungkook said, I'm admitting it. That's not the same thing. Jungkook stepped forward again more carefully this time as if approaching something delicate. Then what do you want me to do? He asked. Pretend none of this happened, go after her and act like I didn't just stand here and… Yes, Jimin cut in sharply, the words slicing through the air. Jungkook blinked, caught off guard. What? Go after her, Jimin repeated, his voice steady now, almost too steady. Fix what you broke. Jungkook stared at him, disbelief creeping in. You don't mean that. I do. No, you don't, Jungkook insisted, stepping closer. You wouldn't have come here if that's what you wanted. Jimin's expression tightened, something conflicted flashing across his face. I came here because I needed closure. Closure, Jungkook echoed, the word tasting wrong. Yes, Jimin said, nodding slightly. I needed to see you one last time to tell you what I couldn't say before, that's it. Jungkook shook his head slowly. That's not true. Jimin's jaw clenched. You don't get to tell me what's true for me. I know you, Jungkook said quietly, better than anyone. Not anymore. The words landed harder than anything else. Jungkook flinched just slightly, but enough for Jimin to notice. That's the problem, Jimin continued, his voice dropping. You keep holding on to who we used to be, but you don't even know who I am now. Then tell me, Jungkook said immediately, tell me what changed. Jimin hesitated. For a moment it looked like he might actually answer. But then he shook his head. It doesn't matter. It does to me. It shouldn't. Jungkook's frustration flared again. Why are you doing this? He demanded. You show up, you say all of that, you make me… He stopped himself, breathing uneven. And now you're pushing me away like it means nothing. Jimin's eyes softened just for a second. It doesn't mean nothing, he said quietly. That's exactly why I'm doing this. Jungkook stared at him, trying to understand. I spent years trying to move on, Jimin continued, his voice trembling slightly now. Trying to rebuild myself without you, and I finally got to a place where I could breathe again, where I wasn't constantly waiting for you to come back. Jungkook's chest tightened painfully. And then you stand there, Jimin said, his gaze locking onto Jungkook, and look at me like I'm still the center of your world. Because you are, Jungkook said without hesitation. Jimin's breath hitched. For a moment, everything else disappeared, the storm, the empty chapel, the echoes of what had just been lost. There was only that truth. Raw, unfiltered, dangerous. Don't, Jimin whispered, his voice breaking, don't say things like that unless you're ready to prove it. Jungkook stepped closer, close enough that their breaths mingled. Then let me. Jimin shook his head, though the resistance in his eyes was starting to crack. You think this is something you can just fix? He asked. You think a few honest words are enough to erase everything that happened between us? No, Jungkook admitted, but it's a start. A start to what? Jimin pressed. Another heartbreak. Jungkook's gaze softened. Or maybe, something we were too afraid to have the first time. Jimin swallowed hard, his defenses wavering. The storm outside intensified, rain beginning to tap against the windows in a steady rhythm, like a countdown neither of them could ignore. I don't trust you, Jimin said finally, the words quiet but firm. Jungkook nodded, I know. And I don't know if I ever can again. I know that too. Then why are you still standing here? Jimin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jungkook didn't hesitate. Because you are. The simplicity of the answer broke something open. Jimin let out a shaky breath, his eyes closing for a moment as if he was trying to steady himself against a wave too strong to resist. You always do this, Jimin murmured. You say exactly what I want to hear. Not this time, Jungkook said softly. This time I'm saying what I should have said a long time ago. Jimin opened his eyes again, searching Jungkook's face for any sign of doubt, any hint that this was just another moment that would fade with time. But there was none. Only truth. And that was what made it so terrifying. Say it again, Jimin whispered. Jungkook stepped even closer, his voice steady despite the storm raging both outside and within him. I chose you then, he said. I was just too afraid to admit it. Jimin's breath caught. And I'm choosing you now, Jungkook continued. Not because it's easy, not because it makes sense, but because it's the only thing that feels real. The words settled between them, heavy with meaning, impossible to take back. Jimin's defenses crumbled piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the truth he had been running from just as much as Jungkook had. You're going to ruin me, Jimin said softly. Jungkook's gaze softened, then we'll be ruined together. For a moment time seemed to stand still. Then slowly Jimin reached out. His fingers brushed against Jungkook's, tentative at first, as if testing whether this was real or just another illusion. Jungkook didn't pull away. Instead, he intertwined their fingers, holding on like he was afraid that if he let go, everything would disappear again. In this time, neither of them tried to pretend they didn't need it. You think holding my hand fixes what you broke? Jimin's voice cut through the fragile quiet, but he didn't pull away. Jungkook's grip tightened instinctively, as if letting go would mean losing him all over again. The rain outside had grown heavier, pounding relentlessly against the stained glass windows, turning the soft light inside the chapel into fractured colors that danced across their faces like something unstable, something on the verge of collapse. No, Jungkook said, his voice low but firm, I don't think it fixes anything. Then why are you still holding on? Jimin demanded, his eyes searching, almost desperate for an answer that wouldn't hurt. Because I don't want to lose you again. The honesty landed between them like a spark hitting dry ground. Jimin's expression faltered, but the tension didn't disappear. It twisted, deepened, turned into something sharper. You already did, he said quietly, years ago. Jungkook exhaled slowly, his chest rising with the weight of everything unsaid. And I've been paying for it ever since. Jimin let out a bitter laugh, though his hand remained intertwined with Jungkook's. You think you're the only one who paid for it? His voice trembled, anger bleeding through. You walked away with a life, Jungkook. You built something, you had stability. And you think that meant I was okay? Jungkook snapped, the sudden intensity in his voice echoing through the empty chapel. You think I wasn't miserable every time I thought about you? Then why didn't you come back? Jimin shot back immediately, his voice rising to meet Jungkook. Why didn't you fight for it if it meant so much? Jungkook's jaw tightened, his silence louder than any answer. Jimin shook his head, his grip loosening slightly now, not fully pulling away but no longer holding on with the same certainty. That's what I thought. I was trying to protect you, Jungkook said suddenly. Jimin froze. The words hung in the air, unexpected and heavy. Protect me, Jimin repeated slowly, disbelief creeping into his tone. From what? From me, Jungkook admitted, his voice rough, almost strained. From everything that comes with being tied to me, the expectations, the pressure, the constant scrutiny. Don't, Jimin interrupted sharply, his eyes flashing. Don't turn this into some noble sacrifice. You didn't leave to protect me, you left because you were afraid. Jungkook didn't deny it. That doesn't mean I was wrong about what it would have done to you, he said quietly. Jimin stepped closer again, his frustration simmering into something more dangerous. You didn't even give me the choice, he said. You decided for both of us that it wasn't worth it. Jungkook's chest tightened. I thought I was doing the right thing. For who? Jimin demanded again, the question more cutting this time, more personal. Jungkook hesitated. And that hesitation said everything. Jimin let out a shaky breath, his gaze dropping briefly before lifting again, more vulnerable now. You don't get to rewrite it, he said. You don't get to stand here and act like it was some kind of love that made you leave. Jungkook's voice softened. It was. No, Jimin said firmly, shaking his head. Love doesn't disappear when things get hard, love doesn't run. Jungkook swallowed hard, the truth of that digging deep. I know that now. Jimin's eyes flickered, something conflicted breaking through his anger. Do you? He asked quietly. Before Jungkook could answer, the chapel doors suddenly slammed open. The sound echoed violently through the space, both of them turning instinctively. She stood there, soaked from the rain, her hair clinging to her face, her chest rising and falling as if she had been running, or maybe fighting, against something unseen. Her presence filled the room instantly, pulling the fragile thread between Jungkook and Jimin taut to the point of breaking. I'm not done. Her voice was steady, but there was a storm behind it that rivaled the one outside. Jungkook's heart dropped. You shouldn't. Don't tell me what I should or shouldn't do, she cut in, stepping forward, her heels echoing sharply against the floor. Not after what you just did. Jimin instinctively stepped back this time, his hand slipping from Jungkook's completely. The absence was immediate. Painful. I left because I thought I needed space to think, she continued, her eyes locking onto Jungkook's. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something didn't make sense. Jungkook frowned slightly, unease creeping in. What do you mean? Her gaze shifted briefly to Jimin, then back to Jungkook. You looked surprised when he walked in, she said slowly, not guilty, not caught, surprised. Jungkook's breath caught. And that means, she continued, her voice tightening, you didn't know he was coming. Jimin stiffened. Jungkook glanced at him instinctively, confusion flickering across his face. I didn't. Then how did he know about the wedding, she asked, the question sharp, precise. Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. Jimin's jaw clenched, his gaze dropping for the first time since she entered. Jimin, Jungkook's voice was quieter now, uncertainty creeping in. Jimin didn't answer immediately. The rain seemed louder. The tension suffocating. I heard about it, Jimin said finally, but there was hesitation in his voice now, something that hadn't been there before. From who? She pressed, stepping closer. Jimin shook his head slightly. It doesn't matter. It does, Jungkook said, his voice firmer now, because I didn't tell anyone. Another silence. Then, your manager. The words were quiet, but they landed like an explosion. Jungkook's expression darkened instantly. That's not possible. It is, Jimin said, meeting his gaze again, though something about his own expression had shifted, less certainty, more unease. He told me where to find you. Why would he do that? Jungkook demanded, his voice rising. Jimin hesitated again. Too long. Jimin, Jungkook pressed, something sharper creeping into his tone. What aren't you telling me? Jimin looked away, his chest rising unevenly now, as if the truth itself was something he was struggling to hold onto. He said, Jimin started then stopped. What did he say? Jungkook demanded. That you needed a reason to stop, Jimin finished quietly. The words echoed. Confusing. Unsettling. Jungkook frowned deeply. A reason to stop what? Jimin's eyes flickered with something uncertain, something that hadn't been there before. He said you were making a mistake, he added, that if I still cared about you I should come. The bride let out a sharp breath. So you just believed him. I didn't know what to believe, Jimin admitted, but I couldn't ignore it. Jungkook ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts spiraling. This doesn't make sense. No, she said quietly, it doesn't. The three of them stood there, the weight of the revelation settling into something far more complicated than any of them had anticipated. Because this wasn't just about love anymore. It was about manipulation. About someone pulling strings behind the scenes. And suddenly, the chaos of the interrupted wedding didn't feel entirely accidental. Jungkook's expression hardened, a new kind of tension replacing the emotional storm from before. He wanted this to happen, he said slowly. Jimin frowned. Why would anyone want that? Jungkook didn't answer immediately. Because deep down, he already had a terrible feeling that he knew. And whatever the truth was, it was going to change everything all over again. You're lying. Jungkook didn't raise his voice, but the accusation struck harder than a shout. Jimin flinched. Rain slammed harder against the windows, thunder rolling low and violent across the sky, as if the storm itself had moved inside the chapel. I'm not, Jimin said, but the hesitation in his voice betrayed him. Jungkook took a step closer, his eyes sharp, searching, almost unforgiving now. Then look at me and say it again. Jimin hesitated. That was enough. Jungkook let out a bitter laugh, dragging a hand through his damp hair. I just destroyed my entire life standing here for you, he said, his voice trembling with something between anger and disbelief, and you're still not telling me the truth? I am telling you the truth, Jimin insisted, but his gaze dropped again, his shoulders tightening like someone bracing for impact. No, Jungkook snapped, you're telling me part of it. Silence. heavy, suffocating. She watched them both, her arms crossed tightly over herself, her expression no longer just hurt but sharp, observant, almost detached in a way that made everything feel more real. Whatever this is, she said quietly, it's bigger than just the two of you. Jungkook didn't take his eyes off Jimin. Then say it, he pressed, all of it. Jimin's lips parted, then closed again. His chest rose unevenly as if the truth itself was something he was trying to hold back with sheer force. He didn't just tell me about the wedding, Jimin said finally, his voice low. Jungkook's eyes narrowed. What else? Jimin swallowed hard. He told me why you were getting married. Jungkook frowned, confusion flashing across his face. What are you talking about? Jimin looked up then, and for the first time since he arrived, there was something different in his eyes. Not just fear, not just hesitation, but something dangerously close to anger. He said it wasn't real, Jimin said, that it was arranged, that you were being forced into it. The words hit like a shockwave. Jungkook froze. She stiffened beside them, her breath catching audibly. That's not, Jungkook started, but the words faltered. Because the moment he tried to deny it. Something in his expression betrayed him. Her gaze snapped toward him, sharp and unyielding. What does that mean? Jungkook didn't answer. Couldn't. The silence stretched too long. And that silence said everything. You told him that? She asked, her voice suddenly colder, quieter in a way that was far more dangerous than anger. I didn't tell anyone, Jungkook said quickly, shaking his head. I swear I didn't. Then why does he know? She cut in, her voice rising now, emotion breaking through. Why does a stranger know something you never told me? Jungkook turned back to Jimin, his frustration igniting again. What exactly did he say? Jimin's jaw tightened. He said you were doing it for your image. For your career, that it wasn't about love. The words hung in the air like poison. Jungkook exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping slightly as if something inside him had just given way. It's not that simple. Then explain it, she demanded. Jungkook looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since she walked back in, there was no hesitation left in him. My contract was ending, he said quietly. There were conditions. Her expression hardened. What kind of conditions? Jungkook's throat tightened, the kind that make people easier to control. Jimin's eyes flickered with understanding and anger. They wanted stability, Jungkook continued, his voice steady but strained. A clean image, something that would quiet rumors. Jimin let out a sharp breath. So you were going to marry her to cover everything up? It wasn't just that, Jungkook said quickly. I thought if I did it, everything would finally calm down, no more pressure, no more expectations hanging over me. And no more me, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook's chest tightened. That's not. But it is, Jimin cut in, his voice breaking slightly. You were going to erase me completely. I was trying to survive, Jungkook snapped, the frustration spilling over now. You think I had a choice? You always say that, Jimin shot back, but every time it matters you choose the easier path. Jungkook's eyes flashed. This wasn't easy. Then why does it look like you were willing to sacrifice everything that mattered? Jimin demanded. Because I didn't think I had anything left, Jungkook shouted. The words echoed through the chapel, raw and unfiltered. Silence followed. Jimin stared at him, something breaking behind his eyes. You had me, he said softly. Jungkook's expression crumpled for just a second. Not anymore. The admission hurt more than any accusation. Jimin looked away, his chest rising unevenly. That's your fault. I know, Jungkook whispered. The storm outside raged harder, lightning flashing through the stained glass, casting fractured colors across their faces like shattered pieces of something that could never be whole again. And you, she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension again, her gaze fixed on Jimin now. You believed all of this and still came here. Jimin hesitated, then nodded slowly. I had to see it for myself. To stop it, she asked. Jimin looked at Jungkook, his expression unreadable. I didn't know what I was going to do. Jungkook's breath caught slightly. Part of me wanted to walk away, Jimin admitted, to let you go through with it, to finally move on for real. And the other part, Jungkook asked quietly. Jimin's gaze softened just slightly. The other part couldn't. Silence fell again, thick and heavy with everything left unsaid. Then, Jungkook's phone buzzed. The sound was sharp, jarring against the fragile quiet. All three of them froze. Jungkook frowned, pulling it from his pocket. The screen lit up, illuminating his face in the dim light. His expression changed instantly. Tension. Recognition. Something darker. "What is it?" Jimin asked, unease creeping into his voice. Jungkook didn't answer immediately. He just stared at the screen. Then slowly turned it toward them. A message. From his manager. "If you've already ruined the wedding, don't make it worse. Walk away now. This is bigger than you think." A chill ran through the room. "That's not normal," she whispered. "No," Jungkook said, his voice low, dangerous. "It's not." Another message came in before anyone could react. "You were never supposed to choose him." The words hit like a gunshot. Jimin's breath caught. Jungkook's grip tightened around the phone, his knuckles turning white. "What does that mean?" Jimin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jungkook didn't answer. Because suddenly, everything felt wrong. Not just the wedding. Not just the past. But everything leading up to this moment. "They knew," Jungkook said slowly, his mind racing. "They knew you would come." Jimin shook his head. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Jungkook asked, his gaze snapping to him. "You said he told you to come, that I needed a reason to stop." Jimin's expression shifted, unease turning into something closer to realization. "They set this up," she said quietly. Jungkook nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "Yeah." "But why?" Jimin asked, his voice unsteady now. "Why go through all this?" Jungkook looked down at the phone again, the messages burning into his vision. Then back at Jimin. And for the first time, there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not confusion. Not fear. But clarity. "Because this isn't about stopping the wedding," Jungkook said. The storm roared outside, thunder crashing like something breaking open. "This is about controlling what happens next." The words settled heavily between them. And suddenly, whatever this was, it wasn't over. It had only just begun. "Then we don't play along." Jungkook's voice was calm, but there was something sharp underneath it now, something that hadn't been there before. Not confusion, not hesitation. Defiance. Jimin stared at him, searching his face as if trying to decide whether this was real or just another version of Jungkook he didn't fully understand. "You think it's that simple?" he asked quietly. "You think you can just walk out and suddenly you're free from whatever this is?" Jungkook let out a breath through his nose, his grip tightening slightly around his phone. "No, I think it's exactly the opposite." The rain outside grew louder, heavier, like something relentless clawing at the world beyond the chapel walls. "They set this up because they expected me to react," Jungkook continued, packing slowly now, his thoughts clicking into place with a precision that made his voice steadier with every word. "They expected me to choose one thing over the other, either go through with the wedding and shut everything down or break it and create chaos. And you did the second one," she said, her tone measured but her eyes sharp. Jungkook nodded. "Exactly, which means whatever comes next they've already planned for it." Jimin crossed his arms, tension coiling in his shoulders. "So what, we just stand here and wait for the next move?" Jungkook stopped packing, his gaze snapping to him. "No, we figure out why they needed this outcome." "And how do you propose we do that?" Jimin challenged, stepping closer again, the earlier distance between them dissolving under the weight of something bigger than either of them. Jungkook held up his phone. "We start with him." Almost as if on cue, the screen lit up again. Another message. This time it wasn't a warning. It was a command. "Leave the venue, alone." The word lingered like a threat. Jimin let out a short, disbelieving breath. "You've got to be kidding me." "She's right," Jungkook said, glancing briefly at her before looking back at the message. "This isn't normal." "Of course it's not normal," she snapped, frustration cutting through her voice now. "You were about to enter into a marriage built on pressure and manipulation, and now someone is orchestrating whatever this is like it's some kind of game." Jungkook's jaw tightened. "It's not a game." Jimin's eyes darkened slightly. "No," he said, "it's control." Silence fell again, but it was different this time, not heavy with unresolved emotions but charged with realization. Don't go, Jimin said suddenly. The words came quickly, instinctively. Jungkook looked at him. Don't go alone, Jimin corrected, his voice steadier now, though the concern hadn't left his eyes. That's exactly what they want. Jungkook hesitated, glancing down at the phone again. Another message appeared. If you don't follow instructions, things will escalate. A chill ran through all three of them. What does escalate even mean? She asked quietly. No one answered. Because none of them liked the possibilities. Jungkook exhaled slowly, then slipped the phone back into his pocket. I'm going. No, Jimin said immediately, stepping in front of him, blocking his path. You're not. I don't have a choice. You always say that, Jimin shot back, his voice rising again, frustration flaring. But this time you actually do. You can choose not to walk straight into whatever trap they've set. And what if not going makes it worse? Jungkook countered, his tone just as sharp now. What if whatever they mean by escalate isn't just about me? Jimin's expression faltered. The implication hung there. Heavy. Unavoidable. You think they'll go after, Jimin started but couldn't finish. I don't know what they'll do, Jungkook said, his voice quieter now but no less intense. And that's exactly the problem. She stepped forward then, her gaze flicking between them. If this is about control, then reacting the way they expect is exactly what gives them power. Jungkook looked at her, something thoughtful passing through his expression. So what are you suggesting? She hesitated for a second, then said, we don't separate. Jimin frowned. That goes directly against what the message says. Exactly, she replied. If they're trying to isolate you, then staying together is the only way to disrupt whatever plan they have. Jungkook considered that, his mind racing. Another flash of lightning lit up the room, followed by a crack of thunder so loud it made the windows tremble. They'll expect resistance, Jungkook said slowly, but maybe not this kind. Jimin tilted his head slightly. You mean we go but not the way they want? Jungkook nodded. We don't follow blindly, we control how we respond. She crossed her arms again, though this time it wasn't defensive, it was focused. Then we need to know where they're sending you. As if summoned by the thought, Jungkook's phone buzzed again. He pulled it out slowly. A new message. An address. Jungkook's expression darkened as he read it. What is it? Jimin asked. Jungkook looked up. It's the old studio. Jimin's eyes widened slightly. That place was shut down years ago. I know, Jungkook said. And you're still thinking about going? Jimin demanded. Jungkook didn't answer right away. Because something about it. Something about that specific location. Didn't feel random. It felt intentional. Too intentional. That's where it started, Jungkook said quietly. Jimin froze. The weight of those words settled between them, heavier than anything before. You mean, Jimin's voice trailed off, memories surfacing whether he wanted them to or not. Jungkook nodded slowly. Yeah. The first place they had met. The place where everything began. And apparently, the place someone wanted them to return to. This isn't just about control, Jimin said, his voice barely above a whisper now. Jungkook's gaze met his. No, he agreed, it's personal. She watched them both, her expression tightening as she realized the depth of what was unfolding. Then whoever's behind this knows both of you. The implication sent a cold shiver through the room. Jungkook clenched his fists. Yeah. Jimin exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. I don't like this. Neither do I, Jungkook said. Another flash of lightning cut through the darkness. For a moment, the chapel was bathed in stark white light, illuminating everything. The broken altar, the scattered petals, the three of them standing in the aftermath of something that was no longer just about love or heartbreak. It was something else now. Something deeper. More dangerous. We go together, Jungkook said finally. Jimin looked at him. And if it's a trap? Jungkook didn't hesitate this time. Then we face it together. The words settled between them, steady and unshakable. Jimin held his gaze for a long moment, searching for doubt, for hesitation, for anything that might make him reconsider. But there was none. Only certainty. And somehow, that was more terrifying than anything else. Fine, Jimin said quietly, but if this goes wrong. It won't, Jungkook cut in. Jimin let out a soft, almost incredulous laugh. You've always been terrible at predicting that. Jungkook allowed himself a faint, fleeting smile. Maybe, but I'm not running this time. The sincerity in his voice left no room for doubt. Jimin's expression softened just slightly. You better not. She watched them, something unreadable passing through her eyes before letting out a quiet breath. Then I'm coming too. Both of them turned to her. No, Jungkook said immediately. Yes, she replied just as quickly. I'm already part of this whether I like it or not, and if someone's pulling strings behind the scenes, I want to know why. Jimin frowned. This could be dangerous. She met his gaze without hesitation, so was staying in the dark. Silence. Then Jungkook nodded slowly. All right, he said, we go together. The decision settled into something final. Irreversible. Outside, the storm raged on, relentless and unforgiving. Inside, three lives stood at the edge of something unknown. Not just unraveling, but stepping into something that had been waiting for them all along. And as they moved toward the chapel doors, the echoes of what they were leaving behind faded into silence. Because whatever came next was already in motion. And this time, there was no turning back. You shouldn't have come back here. The voice echoed through the darkened studio before they even stepped fully inside. Jungkook stopped abruptly, his breath catching as the familiar scent of dust, old wood, and something faintly metallic hit him all at once. The place hadn't changed as much as he expected, yet everything felt different, heavier, like the walls themselves were holding onto memories that refused to fade. Jimin's hand brushed against Jungkook's wrist instinctively, not quite holding but close enough to anchor him. Did you hear that? He whispered. I did, Jungkook replied, his voice low. Behind them, she pushed the door shut, the creaking echo sealing them inside. The storm outside dulled into a distant roar, replaced by a silence that felt far too deliberate. Show yourself, she called out, her voice sharper than the tension in the room. A slow clap answered her. Once. Twice. Then a figure stepped out from the shadows. Jungkook's stomach dropped. You. The man smiled faintly, though there was nothing warm about it. It's been a while. Jimin's expression shifted instantly, recognition hitting just as hard. No, that's not possible. But it was. Because standing there, calm and composed as if none of this was strange or wrong, was someone they both thought they had left behind long ago. You look surprised, he said, tilting his head slightly. I expected more from both of you. Jungkook's fists clenched. You're supposed to be gone. And yet, the man gestured lightly around the studio. Here I am. Jimin stepped forward, his voice tight. You're the one who sent the messages. Of course, he replied easily. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here, and that would have been disappointing. Jungkook's jaw tightened. Why are you doing this? The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly across the room, his footsteps echoing in a way that felt almost calculated. Do you remember this place? He asked instead, running his fingers lightly along the back of an old chair. Jungkook didn't respond. Jimin did. This is where we first met. A small smile curved the man's lips. Exactly. The word lingered, almost satisfied. So you brought us here to reminisce? Jungkook snapped, the edge in his voice sharper now. Or is there actually a reason for all this? Oh, there's a reason, the man said, turning to face them again. There's always a reason. Then say it, she cut in, stepping forward, refusing to be pushed to the sidelines. Enough games. The man's gaze flicked to her, studying her for a moment with quiet interest. You weren't part of the original equation, he said, but I suppose every story needs an unexpected variable. I'm not here to be part of your story, she replied coldly. I'm here for answers. The man chuckled softly. Aren't we all? Jungkook stepped forward now, placing himself slightly in front of both of them, his voice steady despite the storm building inside him. You manipulated everything, he said. The wedding, the messages, you made sure we'd end up here. Yes, the man said simply. No denial. No hesitation. Just truth. Why? Jungkook demanded. The man's expression shifted then, something darker flickering beneath the surface. Because you never finished what you started. Silence. Jimin's breath hitched almost imperceptibly. What are you talking about? Jungkook asked, though something in his chest was already tightening with the weight of a memory he didn't want to face. The man's eyes moved between them, sharp and knowing. You walked away, he said to Jungkook, and you, his gaze shifted to Jimin, let him. Jimin's expression hardened. You don't know anything about what happened. Don't I? The man replied, his voice dropping slightly. I know that you both chose fear over truth. I know that you let something real fall apart because neither of you had the courage to hold on to it. That's not your business, Jungkook snapped. It became my business the moment it destroyed everything else. The words hit differently. Heavier. Jungkook frowned. What does that mean? The man smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. You think your choices only affected you? He asked. You think walking away from each other didn't leave consequences? Jimin shook his head. Frustration flaring. Stop talking in riddles and just say what you want. The man's gaze lingered on him for a moment, then softened in a way that felt almost unsettling. What I want, he said quietly, is for you to understand. Understand what? Jungkook pressed. That this, he gestured around them, was inevitable. Jungkook's patience snapped. No, it was, you made it happen. Did I? The man asked, raising an eyebrow, or did I simply guide you back to where you were always meant to be? Jimin let out a sharp breath. You don't get to decide that. I didn't have to, the man replied calmly. You did that yourselves. The tension thickened, pressing in from all sides. Everything you've done, Jungkook said, his voice dangerously low now, has been about control, so don't stand there and pretend this is anything else. The man studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're right, he said, it is about control. Finally. An admission. But not the kind you think. Jimin frowned. Then what kind? The man stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking until the air itself felt suffocating. The kind that comes from knowing exactly how people will react, he said quietly. The kind that doesn't require force because the outcome is already written. Jungkook's chest tightened. You're wrong. Am I? The man asked, his voice almost gentle now. You were going to marry someone you didn't love, he was going to stay away and pretend he'd moved on, and yet here you are, together, exactly where I knew you'd end up. Jimin's hands curled into fists. That doesn't mean you get to manipulate us into it. I didn't manipulate you into loving each other, the man said. That part was always yours. Silence. Sharp. Unforgiving. Then what's the point of all this? She demanded again, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. If you already knew how it would end, why go through all this trouble? The man looked at her, then back at Jungkook and Jimin. And for the first time, there was no smile. No one leaves this kind of story unfinished, he said quietly. The words sent a chill down Jungkook's spine. What does that mean? He asked. The man didn't answer directly. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled something out. A file. Thick. Worn. He held it out. Jungkook didn't move at first. Take it, the man said. Jimin frowned. What is it? Everything you chose not to see, the man replied. Jungkook stepped forward slowly, his hand hesitating for just a second before taking the file. It felt heavier than it should. Like it carried more than just paper. What is this? Jungkook asked, his voice quieter now. The man met his gaze. The truth, he said. Jimin stepped closer, tension radiating off him. About what? The man's eyes flickered between them one last time. About why you were really separated. The words hit like a shockwave. Jungkook's breath caught. Jimin's expression shifted, something breaking through his composure. That's not, Jimin started, but his voice faltered. Open it, the man said. Jungkook's fingers tightened around the file. The room felt smaller. The air heavier. And suddenly, this wasn't just about what they felt. It was about everything they didn't know. Slowly Jungkook opened it. The first page stared back at him. And whatever he saw made the color drain completely from his face. Jimin, Jungkook whispered, his voice unsteady. Jimin's chest tightened. What is it? Jungkook looked up. His eyes filled with something between disbelief and betrayal. This says, he began, his voice shaking. Then stopped. Because some truths were too heavy to say out loud. And in that moment, Everything they thought they knew about their past started to fall apart. This says you left me first. Jungkook's voice cracked as the words finally forced their way out. The room went still. Not silent because the storm outside still raged, thunder still rolled, but still in a way that felt suffocating, like the air itself had stopped moving. Jimin didn't breathe. What? Jungkook's hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning lines that blurred together but refused to disappear. There are records, he said, his voice unsteady. Messages, statements. It says you requested to cut all contact, that you didn't want me involved in your life anymore. That's not true, Jimin said immediately, the words sharp, almost panicked. I never. There are signatures, Jungkook interrupted, his gaze snapping up. Your name is on them. Jimin shook his head, stepping closer, his heartbeat hammering so loud he could barely hear anything else. That's impossible. I never signed anything like that. Then how is it here? Jungkook demanded, the hurt in his voice rising, twisting into something dangerously close to anger. How is there proof that you were the one who walked away? I didn't, Jimin shot back, his voice breaking. You think I would do that after everything? Jungkook didn't answer. In that silence, that hesitation, cut deeper than any accusation. Jimin staggered back slightly as if physically struck. You believe this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. You believe a piece of paper over me? I don't know what to believe, Jungkook shouted, the tension finally snapping. That's the problem. The echo of his voice filled the studio, raw and unfiltered. She stepped forward quickly, her voice cutting through the chaos. Stop. Both of them froze. You're reacting exactly the way he wants, she said, her gaze sharp, moving between them, fighting each other instead of questioning where this came from. Jungkook clenched the file tighter, his breath uneven. This isn't just something you can ignore. I'm not saying ignore it, she replied. I'm saying think. Jimin's chest rose and fell rapidly, his hands shaking now. I didn't do this, he said, his voice quieter but no less desperate. I would never do that to you. Jungkook looked at him, really looked at him. And for a moment, the anger faltered. Because beneath the panic, beneath the confusion, Jimin looked genuinely broken. You expect me to just dismiss this? Jungkook asked, his voice softer now but still strained. After everything we've already been through. I expect you to know me, Jimin said, his voice cracking again, at least that much. The words lingered, heavy with history, with everything they had once been to each other. Before Jungkook could respond, the man laughed. Not loudly, not mockingly, but quietly, like he had been waiting for this exact moment. You see, he said, stepping forward again, it doesn't take much. Jungkook's head snapped toward him, anger reigniting instantly. Shut up. The man tilted his head slightly, unfazed. A few documents, a little doubt, and suddenly everything you thought was unbreakable starts to fall apart. You forged this, Jimin said, his voice cold now, anger replacing the earlier panic. This isn't real. The man smiled faintly. Isn't it? It's not, Jimin insisted. I know what I did, I know what I didn't do. And yet, the man gestured toward Jungkook. He's not so sure. Jungkook's jaw tightened, his grip on the file almost painful now. Stop twisting this, he snapped. If you have something to say, just say it. The man studied him for a long moment, then sighed softly as if disappointed. You still don't get it. Then explain it, Jungkook demanded. The man's gaze flickered to Jimin, then back to Jungkook. This isn't about whether the documents are real, he said quietly. It's about whether you trust each other enough to ignore them. Silence. The words sank deeper than anything else. Jimin's breath hitched. Jungkook's expression faltered. Because the truth is, the man continued, his voice calm, almost too calm, even without this you were already broken, this just speeds things up. You're wrong, Jungkook said, but there was less certainty in his voice now. Am I? The man asked softly. Look at you. Jungkook didn't move. Didn't speak. Because part of him hated how close that felt to the truth. Jimin stepped forward again, his voice steadier now despite everything. You said this file explains why we were separated, he said, so explain it. The man's smile returned, faint and controlled. It does. Then talk, Jimin snapped. The man exhaled slowly, then finally spoke. There was a decision made, he said, a decision neither of you were fully aware of. Jungkook frowned. What decision? The man's gaze sharpened slightly. You were both seen as a liability. The word hung heavy. Cold. Calculated. A liability to what? She asked, her voice quieter now. To everything that depended on you staying predictable, the man replied. Jungkook's stomach dropped. Jimin's expression hardened. They knew, the man continued, that if you stayed together things would become complicated, uncontrolled, risky. So they separated us, Jungkook said slowly, the realization creeping in. The man nodded, yes. Jimin's fists clenched. Without telling us. You were told, the man corrected, just not the same version of the truth. The room seemed to tilt. Jungkook looked down at the file again, his mind racing. They made it look like I left, Jimin whispered. And they made it look like he chose to stay away, the man added. Jungkook's breath caught. Because that was exactly how it had felt. I tried to contact you, Jungkook said suddenly, his voice unsteady as memories surged back. I called, I sent messages, you never answered. Jimin's eyes widened. I never got anything. Silence. Then, you blocked me. The words came out at the same time. Both of them froze. No, Jimin said immediately. I didn't block you, Jungkook insisted. But the doubt was already there. Creeping in. Spreading. The man watched them quietly, satisfaction flickering in his expression. They made sure you wouldn't reach each other, he said, because if you didn't none of this would have worked. Jungkook felt something inside him crack. Years. Years of believing he had been abandoned. Years of convincing himself that Jimin had chosen to walk away. And now, you're saying all of that was a lie? Jungkook asked, his voice barely holding together. I'm saying, the man replied, that the truth was never yours to begin with. Jimin stepped closer to Jungkook, his voice softer now, almost fragile. I never left you, he said, not by choice. Jungkook looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time, the pieces started to fit together in a way that made sense. Painful sense. I waited, Jimin whispered. I thought you stopped trying. Jungkook's breath hitched. I thought the same thing. The realization hit them both at the same time. Not just misunderstanding. Not just distance. But something deliberate. Engineered. You lost years because someone decided you weren't supposed to stay together, she said quietly. Jungkook closed his eyes briefly, the weight of it crashing down on him all at once. When he opened them again, something had changed. The confusion was gone. The hesitation. Gone. You did this, he said, his voice low, dangerous, directed at the man. The man didn't deny it. I made sure the right choices were encouraged, he said calmly. That's not encouragement, Jimin snapped, that's manipulation. The man tilted his head slightly. Is there really a difference when the outcome is the same? Jungkook stepped forward, his anger no longer restrained. You took years from us. I preserved stability, the man corrected. You destroyed everything, Jungkook shot back. And yet, the man said quietly, you're here now. The words hit differently this time. Not as justification, but as something far more unsettling. Because despite everything, despite the lies, the separation, the years lost, they had still found their way back. Jimin's hand brushed against Jungkook, again, this time not hesitant, not uncertain. Certainly. Grounded. I didn't leave you, Jimin said again, his voice steady now. Jungkook's chest tightened. I know, he said softly. And for the first time, he actually believed it. But the anger didn't disappear. It shifted. Focused. Sharp. Jungkook turned back to the man, his eyes burning with something far more dangerous than confusion. Why now, he demanded. If you went through all that to keep us apart, why bring us back together? The man's expression changed. Just slightly. Enough to matter. Because, he said quietly, this was never meant to stay buried forever. The word sent a chill through the room. And suddenly, this wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about what came next. Then start talking. Jungkook's voice dropped into something colder than anger, something far more controlled and far more dangerous. The storm outside had begun to quiet, but inside the room the tension only tightened like a wire pulled too far, too close to snapping. The man studied him carefully, as if measuring how much truth he could withstand before breaking. "You think you're ready for everything?" he asked. "I didn't come this far to stop halfway," Jungkook shot back, his eyes unflinching. Jimin stood beside him now, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, his presence no longer uncertain. "Whatever it is," he said, voice steady despite the storm inside him, "we face it together." The man's gaze flickered between them, something unreadable passing through his expression. "That," he murmured, "is exactly what they were afraid of." Jungkook's jaw tightened. "Who is they?" For a moment the man didn't answer. Then he exhaled, slow and deliberate, as if crossing a line he could never step back from. "People with power," he said, "people who built everything around you and couldn't afford for you to become unpredictable." Jimin frowned. "We're not machines." "No," the man agreed quietly, "but you were treated like ones." The words landed heavy. Jungkook felt his pulse spike. "You're saying our lives were controlled." "I'm saying your choices were guided," the man corrected. "Subtly, strategically, every opportunity, every distance, every silence, it wasn't random." Jimin let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "So all those years, all that pain was just part of someone else's plan?" "Yes." The answer came too easily. Too clean. And that made it worse. Jungkook stepped closer, his eyes burning. "You expect us to just accept that?" "I expect you to understand it," the man replied. "Acceptance is your choice." Jimin shook his head, anger rising again. "No, you don't get to stand there and act like this is something we can just process calmly. You took everything from us." "I didn't take anything," the man said sharply, for the first time losing a hint of his composure. "I maintained order." "By destroying us," Jimin shot back. The man's gaze hardened. "By preventing something worse." Silence fell again. Heavier this time. "What could possibly be worse than that?" Jungkook asked, his voice quieter now but more intense than ever. The man hesitated. And that hesitation, it changed everything. Jimin noticed it first. "There's more," he said slowly. The man didn't respond. Jungkook stepped even closer, closing the distance completely. "What are you not telling us?" A beat. Another. Then finally. "If you had stayed together," the man said, his voice lower now, almost reluctant, "you wouldn't have just faced backlash." Jungkook frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," the man continued, "there were people who would have made sure you disappeared from everything." The words hit like a shockwave. Jimin's breath caught. "Disappeared." "Careers gone, reputations destroyed, everything you built erased overnight," the man said, "and that would have been the least of it." Jungkook felt something cold settle in his chest. "You're threatening us now." "I'm explaining what was avoided," the man replied. Jimin shook his head, disbelief written all over his face. "No, this doesn't make sense. Why would anyone go that far?" "Because," the man said, his eyes locking onto Jungkook, "you weren't just valuable individually." A pause. "You were powerful together." The room seemed to shrink. Jungkook's mind raced, trying to process it, to make sense of something that felt too big, too unreal, and yet somehow painfully possible. "They were afraid of what we could become?" he asked. "Yes." The answer was immediate. "Certainly." "And separating us was the solution," Jimin whispered, his voice trembling now, anger and heartbreak colliding. "It was the safest option." "For who?" Jimin snapped. The man didn't hesitate this time. "For everyone else." "That did it." Jungkook grabbed the man by the collar, slamming him back against the table with a force that echoed through the room. "You don't get to decide what's safe for us." The woman moved forward quickly. "Jungkook, stop." But he didn't. Years of frustration, confusion, pain, it all surged to the surface at once. "You watched us fall apart," Jungkook continued, his voice shaking with fury. "You let us believe we meant nothing to each other." The man didn't fight back. Didn't even flinch. "I watched you survive," he said quietly. That made Jungkook pause. Just for a second. And in that second, The man spoke again. If you had stayed together back then, he said, you wouldn't be standing here right now. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Unsettling. Jungkook's grip tightened then slowly, reluctantly loosened. Jimin stepped forward. His voice quieter now but filled with something deeper than anger. You're asking us to believe that breaking us was protecting us. I'm telling you that keeping you apart was the only way to keep you alive in the world you were in, the man replied. Jungkook stepped back, running a hand through his hair, his mind spiraling. Nothing felt stable anymore. Not the past. Not the present. Not even his own memories. Jimin watched him, his expression softening despite everything. Hey, he said gently, stepping closer, look at me. Jungkook did. And for a moment, everything else faded. I don't care what they did, Jimin said, his voice steady, grounding. I don't care what they tried to control, we're here now. Jungkook swallowed hard. Together, Jimin added. That word, together, felt heavier now. Stronger, but also more dangerous. Because now they knew exactly what it had cost. They won't just let this go, the woman said quietly, breaking the moment. If what he's saying is true, then you being back together, knowing all this, it changes things. Jungkook turned to her, what kind of things? She hesitated. Then, the kind that puts you back on their radar. Silence. The storm outside had completely stopped now. But inside, something far worse had begun. Jimin exhaled slowly, his fingers brushing against Jungkook, again, this time not just seeking reassurance, but giving it. Then let them watch, he said. Jungkook looked at him, surprised. There was no fear in Jimin's eyes now. Only defiance. I'm done running, Jimin continued. I'm done letting other people decide what we're allowed to be. The words hit deep. Jungkook felt it. That shift. That fire. And for the first time since everything had unraveled. He felt it too. A slow, dangerous determination rising in his chest. You said we were powerful together, Jungkook said, turning back to the man. The man nodded slightly. Jungkook's gaze hardened, then maybe it's time we stop letting that scare us. The man watched him carefully. And for the first time, there was something different in his expression. Not control. Not calculation. Something closer to concern. You don't understand what you're stepping into, he said. Jungkook didn't look away. Then we'll learn, he replied. Jimin's hand tightened slightly against his. And this time, Jungkook didn't pull away. The man exhaled slowly, as if realizing something had shifted beyond his reach. Once you move forward with this, he said, there's no going back. Jimin didn't hesitate. We're not going back. The words settled into the room like a final decision. A line drawn. A path chosen. And somewhere far beyond that room. Beyond the storm, beyond the silence. Something else was already beginning to move. The city felt different the next morning. Not quieter, not calmer. Just exposed. Like something hidden for too long had finally been dragged into the light, and now everything carried a sharp, unfamiliar edge. Jungkook stood by the window watching the streets below come back to life. Cars moved, people passed by, everything looked normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. Behind him, Jimin stirred. You didn't sleep. It wasn't a question. Jungkook exhaled softly, his reflection in the glass faint but distant. I tried. Jimin sat up slowly, studying him for a moment before getting out of bed and walking over. He didn't hesitate this time, he didn't question it. He just stood beside him. Close. Are you still thinking about what he said? Jimin asked quietly. Jungkook let out a small, humorless breath. How do I not? Jimin didn't answer right away. Because there was no easy answer. They controlled everything, Jungkook continued, his voice low. Our choices, our distance, even the way we saw each other. He shook his head slightly. I don't even know which memories are real anymore. Jimin turned to face him fully. This is real. Jungkook looked at him. Jimin's gaze didn't waver. Right now, Jimin said, this moment, us standing here, no one's controlling this. Jungkook searched his expression, as if trying to find something solid in the middle of everything that had been taken from them. And what if they try again, he asked. They will, Jimin said simply. No hesitation. No denial. And somehow, that honesty grounded him more than any reassurance could have. Jungkook let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair. Then what do we do? Jimin didn't look away. We stop letting them decide what we lose. The words settled between them, quiet but unshakable. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Jungkook gave a small nod. Not dramatic. Not loud. But certain. I spent years thinking you chose to leave, he admitted, his voice softer now. I told myself it was easier to hate you than to miss you. Jimin's expression flickered, something painful passing through his eyes. I spent years thinking I wasn't enough for you to stay. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything they had never said. I was wrong, Jungkook said. So was I, Jimin replied. Jungkook let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in his chest for years. They took time from us. Jimin nodded slowly. They did. Jungkook's gaze sharpened slightly, but they didn't take everything. Jimin's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile but close. No, he said, they didn't. Another quiet moment passed. Then, what happens now? Jungkook asked. Jimin tilted his head slightly, considering the question, then looked back at him. Now, he said, we decide what this is, not them, not anyone else. Jungkook held his gaze. And for the first time since everything had unraveled, the future didn't feel like something already written. It felt open. Uncertain. But theirs. A phone buzzed on the table behind them. Both of them turned. The sound cut through the stillness, sharp and intrusive. Jungkook walked over, picking it up slowly. An unknown number. He stared at it for a second too long before answering. Hello. Silence. Then, a voice. Calm. Familiar. You've made your decision. Jungkook's grip tightened slightly. Who is this? You already know, the voice replied. Jimin stepped closer, his expression darkening. Jungkook's jaw clenched. If this is another warning. It's not a warning, the voice interrupted. A pause. Then, it's an acknowledgement. Jungkook frowned slightly. Of what? Of the fact that you didn't break. The word sent a quiet chill through him. You were given every reason to walk away from each other, the voice continued, and you didn't. Jimin crossed his arms, his gaze sharp. What do you want? A soft exhale came from the other end. Nothing, the voice said, not anymore. Jungkook's eyes narrowed. I don't believe that. You don't have to, the voice replied calmly. Just understand this, what happens next is no longer something we will control. Silence. Jungkook felt his heartbeat slow just slightly. And that means, he asked. It means, the voice said, whatever you become from here is entirely your own doing. The line went dead. Jungkook lowered the phone slowly, his mind racing. Jimin watched him. What did they say? Jungkook looked at him. And for the first time, there was no fear in his expression. They're letting go. Jimin blinked, surprised. Just like that. Jungkook shook his head slightly, not because they want to. A small, quiet understanding passed between them. But because they can't anymore, Jimin finished. Jungkook nodded. The tension that had been wrapped around everything for so long didn't disappear. But it shifted. Loosened. Just enough. Jimin let out a slow breath, then glanced back toward the window. So that's it. Jungkook followed his gaze. The world outside kept moving. Unaware. Unchanged. And yet, everything had changed. No, Jungkook said softly, that's not it. Jimin looked at him. Jungkook met his eyes, something steady and unshakable settling in his expression. That's just where we start. Jimin smiled then. Not faint. Not hesitant. A real one. And this time, Jungkook didn't look away. Didn't doubt it. Didn't question whether it would last. Because for the first time, it wasn't about what they had lost. Or what had been taken. Or what could still go wrong. It was about what they were choosing. And they were choosing each other. No manipulation. No distance. No one else deciding how their story ends. Just them. And whatever came next. The city moved on. The past stayed where it belonged. And somewhere between everything they had been. and everything they could become. Their story didn't end. It finally began.